Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord. Today we'll be finishing up with Eric Medhouse's memoir From Heaven and making some comparisons to my own experience. And as we are at, what are we? Number 45 of Average Folks in the Afterlife, I believe. I'll be lining up some other works of interest in this genre for you shortly thereafter. We've read quite a bit from Eric's text channeled through his medium, and I think appropriately so. This book covers a lot of ground that other books only hint at, if they cover at all. So I feel it's useful and instructive to go into it in detail. Now, he's got quite an extensive chapter about his life as a guide. I'm going to read a couple of sections of that for you, and then make some comparisons to my own work a little bit. Eric, here he goes. Here, I have a story for you. This one blog member, Sarah, has been part of Channeling Eric, that's the website, for a long time. She started out with a bare-bones spiritual belief system, but now she's fully on board. One day I nudged this guy to join the blog. He was stuck in life and needed some direction, so I rigged his computer so that the blog would pop up on his screen. It took several times before he would read a blog post, and once he did, he couldn't stop reading for several days, and eventually he got brave enough to tell his story in the comments section. He wrote that he wasn't sure why he was on Earth and why he was having such a crappy life. So Sarah responded. She took him under her wing and taught him the value of the human experience. A reminder to appreciate the lessons we're here to learn. She connected to him with empathy and sincerity. They ended up helping and supporting each other, and all it took was a little push and some light hacking from me. Even though I mostly concentrate on helping people deal with death and grief, I also help them with other things, like how to move forward with their life if they're stuck in a rut. If I sense someone is struggling with that and I think communication from the beyond would help, that's my cue to swoop in and take the person under my counsel. I don't know what to call it. Do I call it spiritual rescuing? That's not really any good way of describing it. People who are extremely lost in life might find Jesus and become born-again Christians. That might work for them. It pulls them back into their lives and makes them care again. It gives them a structure. It gives them this new light and hope. But how do I say that in terms of non-denominational spirituality? Well, I certainly identify with that, Eric. It's not like a come to Jesus moment. I don't help people find Jesus specifically. I help them discover their personal spiritual strength, wherever that lies. Sometimes I have trouble with restraining myself when I guide people. It frustrates me because I want to do more for them than I'm supposed to do. I just want to dump the whole shitload of knowledge and love into someone's head all at once because I get too excited. But my colleagues help me stay in line. They help me find different ways to deliver what I want to reach or teach without drowning my student. I can't just drop stuff into their brains when they aren't ready. That's not going to go over well. But I can drop hints, and these small hints can help create a larger movement toward healing and progress for them. Agreed. Being the most effective guide possible is really important to me, and I can't be that if I go in all guns blazing. Guides can influence people, but not control them. A guide is both hands-on and hands-off, and it's important to know which tactic to use in each situation. Humans sometimes need to learn how to figure things out for themselves, and a good guide makes them aware of how to do it. That means that something I need to back off, sometimes especially, to get out of their way and just observe. For me, that balance is like walking a fucking tightrope sometimes. Sometimes I get so frustrated I want to say, "Can't you see?" but some humans need to walk their paths pretty much alone. Sometimes it's a spiritual lesson for them, and I can't argue with that. I think we can see Eric as still, a bit of a newbie here. That tightrope thing gets easier as time goes on. I don't find it difficult myself. I can pitch the little bit of knowledge or the little bit of insight to the soul, either struggling here on earth when I meet them out of body, or the deceased person struggling on the lower astral that needs a little bit of insight about where they are and where they might be able to go. In order to help more than one person at a time, I had to learn how to split or divide myself into a lot of Erics. One of my guides taught me how. I'll call him the Sergeant. It's not his real name, it's just my nickname for him. I call him that because he really makes me stick to my commitment to learn to do things well. I decided that I need to be able to control my splitting when I found out that I had 3 people thinking about me at the same time, then 4, 20, 100, and I wanted to be with all of them. It's a challenge, no question. Feeling splitting, it was like a natural instinct. I can feel this division happening on its own. Yes, it just seems to go all by itself. It doesn't feel like I'm pulling myself into individual pieces, though. It feels like I'm multitasking in my head, like I can read, write, chew gum, and problem solve, but with complete clarity for each of those tasks. I let it all take place on its own, but then I get scared or excited when all these clear thoughts are happening at once. Then the splitting stops. So the Sarge helped me use my heart consciousness to concentrate on being a bunch of Erics at one time without getting distracted or overstimulated and then crapping out when I want to split into another Eric. How do I explain that if I'm in 100 places at once and can, with great clarity, understand, feel, work, and give myself to 100 people at one time? And then I want to do it for 101. If I'm adding that extra one, it doesn't kill the other 100 just because I'm having that new experience with this new person. He showed me, when I want to split myself some more, how to maintain my focus so I don't get overwhelmed. Actually, it's not a focus really, it's more like a letting go feeling. He's like, let it happen, let it go, and then it just does. Splitting into infinite cells feels amazing. Imagine looking at yourself in a mirror and there's another mirror behind you. You see infinite reflections of yourself in the mirror you're facing. My home base is between that first set of facing mirrors, but it doesn't feel like all my other reflected selves are in a different location. Say I divide into 4 Erics so I can help 4 people on Earth at the same time. I get this sense in each of those 4 parts of me of what I'm learning and understanding and doing and how it is a reflection number 1. At the same time, I'm directly experiencing in reflections 2, 3, and 4. That's because the experiences of all the divided me's go back to home base. But home base is not 2 miles from Eric 1, 100 miles from Eric 2, 5 feet from Eric 3, and 6 inches from Eric 4. Home base is also in each of those 4 Erics. It's in every reflection. Does that make sense? Let me use another analogy. Take a prism. The sunlight goes through it as the energy of my soul, my energy, my prime energy. The prism is the tool I use to divide the sunlight into all the colors of the rainbow. But there's still only one prism, and separate colors still represent the entirety of my lights. Here's another analogy. I take my heart conscious energy and shake it loose like a salt shaker so that all the salt granules are dispersed. This way I can go to the houses of those blog members, 1 salt granule at a time. Each granule has my ability to communicate, prank, get information, learn, teach, help, heal, observe, visit my family, and everything else I do, all at the same time. Then when I begin each salt granule back into the salt shaker, consciously, it all becomes part of me again. To someone on Earth, that might seem impossible, but you have to remember that both time and energy work differently here. My main job is being a guide, but I also have other roles. One thing I like to do is help new spirits communicate with their family members and friends on Earth. Not all spirits have an easy time communicating. Like all the skills we have here, some are better at them than others. So I take the newbie spirit who just died and harass him a little bit. Then I show him the ropes, and after that I teach him how to pull pranks, give signs, visit his humans through dreams, and communicate in other ways. Eventually I kind of set him free to develop those skills on his own. I don't do that with a lot of random spirits who cross over, though. I usually only help the deceased loved ones of blog members because we already have a connection. But if a blog member dies, I teach him how to connect with family and friends. Sticking to the home team, I see. I don't make that distinction myself, particularly. I don't really have a home team. And I don't think I really want one either. But you work with all kinds of different people and belief systems. And the training is worthwhile. Working with different religious groups and their suppositions, expectations, and prejudices, it's a challenge. But I'm up to it. And so will you be with the necessary experience. You'll get to it. I've also helped people cross over, but I don't do that very often. I've pulled them out of their bodies, told them what's up, handed them off to their wives, children, other spirit guides, whoever. It's an incredible experience, but it's not my expertise. I'll do it especially when a blog member says, "Help, man, just come with me and be my family member while he's dying." Hell yeah, I'll be there. I'll help them with their transition, show them around, and help them get oriented. Another role I have is to help heal people's energy. I didn't know how much about that at first. I thought it was about putting a band-aid on someone's boo-boo. But now I see that I help people help themselves. They have that power, and they've had it all along. I also help people who want to take their lives, especially those with mental illnesses. If they've tried everything they can, therapy, medicine, whatever, and they're doing their best but are still suffering, I help them with their decision. Society judges people who take their own lives even when it's their time and they're suffering. I'm trying to change that kind of thinking. If it's not a person's time, I guide them to find other ways to get help, and I show them that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Interesting point, that. And I've worked in similar situations myself. And although I've mentioned this in some of my blog posts, I don't think I mentioned it on YouTube. When I'm part of an out-of-body team that's working natural disasters like tornadoes and earthquakes and tsunamis, etc., etc., one of the issues can be once you break through the initial mass confusion of hundreds and hundreds of people dying in 10 minutes, and obviously there's a lot of helpers there, not just me and 3 pals. There's lots. And you barely have time to speak to each other. You're whizzing about. But people get trapped under the, the collapsed buildings, etc., or mounds of soil. And they're actually dead, but they don't know it. Happens so quickly. And they're stuck inside their bodies, think they're buried alive. And you have to talk them out of, no, you're not buried alive. Just come on with me. But the issue comes up where some of the, many of the injured, badly injured or whatever, are, let's say, one out of a family, what we would think of as a nuclear or even an extended family, one or two of 5 or 6 or 8 people. And they're very depressed. The rest of the family's all gone. They may only have, cousins 500 miles away or something, or, neighbors. And they want to be with their family members, especially parents and children. And one can understand that. And when I meet them out of body, because they all go out of body when they're asleep at night, whether they're conscious of it in the morning or not, just like the rest of us, normal folk leading normal lives outside of earthquakes and tornadoes, I try to convince them, I try to show them how they don't have to return to that sleeping body, that they can come with me to the astral plane where their deceased relatives are. And the idea appeals to them initially, joyfully, as they see through the sort of chaos of their grief and pain. But then if they're strongly religious, as people in the Middle East particularly are, and and I've done earthquakes out that way. Um, they don't. Their religious teaching kicks in, and it's like, oh no, I'm committing suicide, and I'm saying, well, no, not exactly. You're just not going back to that. See that sleeping body down there, the one with the two broken legs and the crushed ribs. That's the one you're not going back to, because it's not a suitable vehicle for the rest of your life, unless you really want that vehicle for the kind of experience you will get. But up here is your grandfather, your mother, your two sisters, etc., etc. And some of them go, some of them stay. All I'm saying is it's a tough choice. And I'm with Eric. I'm trying to change that old way of thinking that says it's the morally superior, brave, in line with Jesus's or whatever prophet you want to name, teaching, or the dictates of the church, temple, whatever. Because all that stuff's just based on what I would consider the unenlightened lack of insight of priests and, priestly functionaries who've done nothing but read ancient sacred books and have no direct experience of their own. And for people like me, they're like the one-eyed man in the kingdom of the blind. They see in one direction, but not over here and not over there. So just a small point, agreeing with Eric there. And I see where he's coming from. I really do. I've never actually said to, a depressed teenager, oh, come on and commit suicide. Obviously, I try to talk them out of it. If you can, always get through to them. And usually you sort of run into them when they're already dead. And then it's the whole story of trying to convince them that they're dead. So splitting up into different parts. Well, I don't know. Eric and his hundreds of beings. I've never felt that I've been able to do that. But when I wrote about it about 10 years ago through conscious experience, I was certainly splitting up into 3 or 4. And I'd been sort of taught that by my then guide, Henry, in this book, More Adventures in Eternity. And so you could say I was sort of imitating his experience, but I was kind of thinking, well, I'm the newbie here, and Henry knows how to do that, and I guess I'll learn one day. And in this book, there are many diaries of projected consciousness experiences that are aided by hemisync tapes. That's the tapes that you can get from the Monroe Institute that really beautifully facilitate consciousness projection. And if you don't know about them, I suggest you check them out. So Thursday, July the 23rd, I don't know, 2004 maybe, I'm not sure. Usual methodology in hemisync tape. Upon exiting the body, a sense of zany comedy erupts. Astral Gordon seems to think, gee, what'll I do tonight? I just don't know, do you? Now, Astral Gordon is who I call who I am when I'm out of body. And it's already been established earlier in the book that he's quite a different character from physical plane Gordon. He's significantly more playful, enlightened, knowledgeable, goofy as all get out. But, that's the way you are when you're out of body and you're experienced about it. There's no limitations, at least not while you're out of body before you get back in. So anyway, I just don't know, do you? Then a replica Gordon appears from number 1, standing next to him. He shrugs his shoulders in the classic search me pose. Then he says, why don't you ask him? Maybe he knows. Number 3 then pops out from number 2, but he acts just as clueless as the first 2. They stare at each other in a parody of idiocy. Marx Brothers? Then they fly out the window and onto a branch of the tree outside, my old friend Walter. I lived in a 5th floor apartment then, and there was ash trees outside, and I really grew to love them over the years, 20 odd years that I lived there. They dangle their legs like happy boys skipping school. Number 1 says, I think maybe I'll visit my dear dead mother. My mother passed that same year. The other 2 nod, wide-eyed. Number 2 says, maybe I'll go to Sudan and see for myself just how vicious that civil war really is. Number 3, suddenly inspired, says, maybe I'll go to England and cavort with devas and crop circles. Then they fly off in three directions as if challenging the observing me to try and follow. Number one does indeed visit his dear dead mother, who of course is also my dear dead mother. I find them seated on a lawn somewhere, probably the nursing home grounds. She is with her long passed over sister, someone who is very dear to her heart and with whom I am sure she is thrilled to be reunited. They have obviously had plenty of time to get reacquainted, as they seem quite comfortable together. Nellie and I exchanged cautious greetings. I was about 4 years old when she passed. I'm not even that, I might even 3. There's a formality to our interaction that I find quite amusing, the result, I suspect, of an energy blockage caused by her not having a boy child while she was on Earth. Although why that should be operative after 50-odd years Earth, I can't say. As sisters, they were deeply bonded during World War II when both their husbands were abroad for years, and their daily lives intertwined to make them and their 4 girls almost one family. I did not come along until several years after that and was perhaps seen as a bit of an interloper or cause for jealousy. Number 2 flies over Africa, but takes a small detour to the Middle East first, becoming one of the endlessly rotating crew of discarnates who beam light onto the roiling mass of dark cloud-like energies covering Israel-Palestine. He doesn't so much originate the beam, but merges and magnifies what is already there. After some of that no-time, he moves on to Sudan, expecting the worst. The observing eye resists following, reluctant to observe the cutthroat raids, destroyed villages, starving children, and mass rapes which are likely to emerge. Rather like flipping through the entertainment section of the newspaper and knowing exactly which movies you'd rather not see. Looking back at it later, when the observing me had come to terms with his disgust by allowing the heavy vibrations of vengeance and bestiality to pass through unhindered instead of being hindered by pride and ethics, I could see this Gordon attempting to apply energetic zaps of mercy and compassion at those who were either preparing or conducting a program of rape and pillage. Mostly it was ineffective, as the rage and bloodthirst which propelled the attackers had a determined steely edge which could not be significantly softened. I fretted about free will and chain of karma issues as I watched the grim tales unfold. A number of other angelic entities and helpers surveyed the scene with attitudes saddened by inevitability. And of course, ethnically appropriate guides assisted the dead to remove themselves from the scene. Number 3 shifts quickly to England and meets up with a deva intimately concerned with the crafting of crop formations. A merging of beings which could be considered a discussion of sorts leads to a suggestion that I should perhaps re-experience the druid character who was in on the plan to begin with. I've sensed this character several times before and made certain efforts to, as we say these days, understand where he was coming from. I see now that he is but one of several druid types who incarnated as my monad, higher self, my monad's contribution to the culture. In an earlier meditative connection completed while sitting inside a formation on a very hot day in the summer of 2001, I'd gotten the distinct impression that the whole crop circle phenomenon of modern times was planned out by a gathering of humans and devas who knew, even then, of the energy vibrational shift slated for the planet, and together prepared the energetic templates for the elaborate designs now emerging in the fields. The news had not surprised me, but like any other of a dozen other issues brought up by my explorations, I had not gotten around to exploring it farther. Perhaps now was the time. Of course, now is always the time. But the scheduling nature of physical plane life tends to put agendas into lists of things to do, and some of those things seem to take forever to get to. There are just so many fascinating avenues of exploration, and each of them leads to at least 4 others. All cultures worthy of their appellation have their share of ancient wisdom, for no matter how maligned or repressed or by power-hungry elites and the armies of the ignorant, fonts of ancient light have and always will poke their heads through the cracks in the concrete. And though the counsel of the wise will more often be mocked than moved on, it is always there for the truly curious. The Druids, at least those who lived in ancient Britain, were a priestly, scholarly elite of distinctly Celtic hue, whose profoundly oral culture leaves plenty of room for romanticising and guesswork. I do not propose that my incarnational access is any more accurate or verifiable than any other source. I offer it humbly, without any hint or assistance of doctrinal authenticity. Anyway, there's lots of stuff about Druids there. But that was one of my first experiences of splitting up into 4 beams of light, or 3. There are others in there. And as I say earlier in the book, my guide, who was dictating the first part of the book, had his experience of talking to Maitreya and 3 other parts of his being going elsewhere while he was talking to Maitreya. And at the time, I thought that was pretty heavy duty, I'll have to say. And I should mention also, and I probably won't have to get to this till the next reading, but in my book, You Are History, which is all about the higher self, the monad, the higher self, the group soul, the source soul that each sort of incarnate entity comes from, as a projection, a consciousness projection. The relationship between the higher self and the incarnations of its energy are similar to what Eric was saying about bringing back his many Erics to home base. Very similar. And I've written about it to quite some extent in that book, but I don't have it right in front of me. And I'll read it next time. It's fairly complex, but I think a few pages will give you a basic idea. And as I say, this is the last time we'll delve into Eric's stuff. And here's another little interesting bit. He's talking about teasing his family and messing around, and how much fun it is, and different things he can manifest. Making smells is a kind of my specialty, and they're never like roses or perfume. I like to create really nasty ones like cigar smoke, rotten fish, pot, farts, smelly socks, and other rank smells. All I have to do is figure out the energy signature of that smell on earth and duplicate it. That's pretty easy. It's like reading a recipe from a cookbook and cooking it. Then I get right next to the person I want to annoy and put that same smelly energy pattern copy in their space. I find it hilarious when they wrinkle up their noses and cough, especially when there's not a dog running around to blame. A lot of humans get visits from birds, butterflies, and other insects after a family member or a friend dies, and they think their loved one all of a sudden turned into a bug or a bird or something. I can see how someone would think that, but that's not quite true. It's a special moment for them, though, and so I use my energy to steer anything that can fly. I usually use dragonflies because they're pretty easy to steer. All I have to do is use my energy to manipulate the energy around the dragonfly so that it'll fly in the direction I want it to go. It's kind of like flying a drone. The energy around the insect feeds into the energy of the insect, so I start there and I go in. I've done this many times to my mother. Once I made a dragonfly go around her in circles, around and around and around, and then I made it sit still in the chair right next to her. I've done this to my dad too. He races motorcycles, and you know me, I love being around anything with wheels. So one long weekend when my dad was at the track, I made a big orange dragonfly follow him wherever he went. I even made it sit on his shoulder for a couple of hours. I liked chilling with him for those 3 days, but it kind of made him freak out a little. Not in a bad way. He liked it because he knew it was me. I just made sure not to have it sit on his shoulder while he was racing, because his bike is fast and I don't think the dragonfly would appreciate it that much. The point of screwing around and having fun with people on Earth is to chip away at their skepticism bit by bit. I don't want to do it in scary ways or ways that are too intense all at once. That would be counterproductive. I prefer to let loose, enjoy myself, and try to make these experiences enjoyable for the people whose lives I like to touch. After all, what would be the point if I just ended up by scaring people off instead of inviting them to open their minds and hearts and explore with me? Exactly. A little chapter called My Thoughts on Humanity. It sucks, it sucks, it sucks to watch the human race struggle. If people had just had a little more patience with themselves in the world, then they'd be able to see that they create a lot of their own struggles. They don't see the opportunities that are presented to them through those struggles. You know how there's that old adage, history repeats itself? Well, that's pretty true. Look at all the wars, the injustices, all that shit we've been dealing with for literally thousands of years. But guess what? If we actually took a step back collectively as a race of beings and made the conscious effort to learn from our past mistakes, then we might actually get somewhere. I think that human beings are doing that slowly. Progress is being made. It's just slow and hard. But that's just part of the cosmic bargain. I don't know if I agree, Eric. How can I say? That phrase, those who ignore history are condemned to repeat it. Well, in my time, in my, sort of 45 odd years as an adult, I'm adding 45 to 15, getting 60, or 50 years if you like, I've seen many things go down that were either controlled, manipulated, instigated, exacerbated, ignited by diplomats and politicians and generals, all of whom had MAs, PhDs, in all sorts of stuff that should have, history, at least economic history, political history, governance, you name it, military history. You don't get to be the top of the tree without getting one of those degrees. And they all full well know that all this shit has gone down many times before. But they still initiate or provoke or get in to yet another decimating struggle. Making sure, of course, that their kids aren't on the front line, of course, that they're back in college safe. And they get the tally-ho, gung-ho, let's support the empire lads and lassies out there to do the tough work and die. So I don't necessarily see that knowledge of history in any way stops you from repeating it. There are very few examples. I think when the genocidal struggle was going on in the Balkans, several European politicians justified their actions, which was, bombing, to try and stop the side that was winning at that point in time, made references to Nazism conquering Europe. And they thought, well, we can't have this happen again. And they would say, well, I can remember that. Yeah. That's about the only example I can think of. I mean, you talk about all the other stuff, Vietnam, Cambodia, Sudan, anywhere in Africa you like, and South America. Incredible repression and ruthlessness and cruelty in the name of some, cheap jack political ideology that says, okay, these guys get to make all the profit and you lads, you get to be the slaves. And now just sit down and pay attention and do what you're told. So anyway, Eric's got a ways to go yet, I think. Now, you're probably saying, does he think that this will ever get any better? Well, yeah, I think it will. But not through studying history. Because look at all the people that have studied it and not done a bloody thing. And I'm including the Russians when I say that. I'm not just, pointing the finger at the decadent West. Russia and China have got, a fair bit of historical knowledge. They know what went down 1,500, 2,000 years ago. China particularly. They just choose to ignore it. We spirits don't see global issues like the unrest in the Middle East and hunger and disease and stuff like that as a bad thing. That sounds really cold and heartless, but remember, good and bad don't really exist on the spirit level. Yeah, but the hunger and disease don't exist on the spirit level either, Eric. It's all part of an ongoing process of evolution. Suffering and conflict make people aware of what they want and don't want. It helps them choose what creates suffering and what alleviates it and what serves them and what doesn't. As spirits, we kind of watch everything play out on the world stage from the wings, but we're also slowly finding our voice again to bring about a global awareness of human suffering. What, television and the internet doesn't do that? I think it does. I think that way people process suffering is a lesson in global connection or lack thereof. When this shit comes on TV, half the people don't fucking want to tune in. It's like, what the fuck? That's a world away. I'm sitting on my couch and I can't connect to that directly. So I'm just going to tune out. The other half of the people get angry, and you can't have resolution with anger. There'll be a few people, though, who rise up like Gandhi or Martin Luther King, or even just a kid who stands up to a schoolyard bully. They'll rise up and say, enough. That's part of the larger dance of learning from pain and injustice, too. Anyway, that's basically Eric's point of view on that, of course, which I obviously disagree with. But, that's the thing about being a spirit in the spirit world, and I'm there part-time. I function part-time as a spirit in the spirit world. Then I come back here and function as a regular dude doing his job and paying his taxes. But you don't have to be in the spirit world to get the big view, the big, wide, deep view. You can read a few history books. And that's another thing a lot of people don't really want to do because they're usually big and fat and heavy to hold when you're lying in bed trying to fall asleep. But it's true. You can take time out from your busy schedule and get the big cinemascope view of the planet and all its little problems. Big problems, little problems. Anyway, all's well in whatever ends well. I don't know if does it end well. I suppose it does. If you die, it ends well, and if you're still here, you get to drag your ass through another 10 years of oh my God, is this going to happen again? But I'm a bit of an old soul. I've seen a lot of this shit go down for thousands of years, so I've got that sort of old soul attitude. I leave it to the younger souls who have more enthusiasm and idealism than I do. I specialize in serenity myself. And if you've learned any of that from me, I say, yahoo. And we'll be back soon with another edition of Average Folks in the Afterlife. God, I'm sounding like a TV show, aren't I?